Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you everyone for attending this session today. We are going to be talking about lessons learned from deploying JSM in an Agile environment. So I'm going to give you a brief background about myself. Okay. I lead Centric Consulting, their Agile practice in St. Louis, Missouri. And I provide consulting for businesses aiming to scale their use of Agile, as well as increase their use of Atlassian through tool configurations and through training. We have various locations throughout the states. So we have something in St. Louis, Boston, Chicago, Charlotte, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus, India, Seattle, Tampa, Miami, all over the place. I have as you see here, I've had quite a few certifications in Jira. And so my recent experience was working with an organization setting up their JSM. So what is JSM? So if you don't know what the Jira Service Management is, it's a dedicated tool for ITSM practices. And so it provides you with specific queues, and it helps you respond to those service requests quickly, and also allows you to do some tracking and approving your change request. What I also like about it is it offers a self-service knowledge base to help provide help to those requesters and to your customers before entering the request. And so to give you a little bit of background on the organization and some reasonings why they moved to JCM, I wanted to kind of provide, we looked at the people, process, and technology. So what we're doing is we're migrating from a legacy help desk into JSM. So their current user interface was not very intuitive. And there was a high cost because everyone had to have a user license. And then all of the requests that people would submit in was one generic service request. And so all of the attributes, whether you're requesting hardware, software, or even onboarding employees, were all grouped together. And it was sent to an email. And so there was really challenges to determine, what information was required and what they were actually asking for. And then their emergency change request. So it was required to go through the full change issue lifecycle. And so they really didn't have different workflows if it was a standard request or if it was an emergency request. And then the ITIL best practices were really loosely followed. And then there were longer triage times because, as I mentioned, those emails coming in took a lot of time for the agents to evaluate each of them and to determine, what was the type of request and what exactly was the action that was needed to be taken. And then around the technology, so within their current application, customized reports were actually like ad hoc queries that they would have to reach out to the vendor, and the vendor would have to customize these. And that was an additional cost. And then they had a manual on-call calendar. So they were like utilizing various Outlook calendars to help set up the on-call. And then for tracking of assets, there really was no way to track assets within their current system. So some of the challenges that we have, there was a long list of challenges. So I'm really going to address the top 4 in this session. And so the first one is around the challenges to capture the escalation, because as I mentioned before, these requests were just going through emails. So there really wasn't a T1, T2, T3, or level 1 or P1, whatever your categories are on escalations. There was no SLA processes. So we really couldn't capture how long a certain request would take. And they didn't have any baseline data. And then finding the requester's contact information and the managers for approval. So these agents are getting all these emails in and they're like, okay, who's the manager? Who's the correct person that I need to reach out to get approval? If they're requesting, new computers, or if they're requesting a phone or just the software. And then that whole approval process was very complicated. And so once again, when it came into email and they found out who the manager was, they would send and forward the email to that manager. And so sometimes that approval would get stuck, especially when that approver was out of office. So some of the solutions that we provided was ITIL workflows that would really help us capture the proper tier levels and escalation. And one thing we had is the client was already using Jira. So they were using it for their infrastructure and their engineering. And so we worked out of some of them when it went to a certain tier level, it would actually populate their Jira project. So it'd show up on their boards. We also had SLAs. So we started to define some baseline metrics. And then we also connected to Azure AD. And this really helped us to display the employee information. So these are our challenges. These are some of our solutions. So I'm going to go and talk about our Agile approach and then how we solved for some of these challenges in a little bit more detail. So within our Agile approach, we went in using a partnership, because most times they'll reach out to you and they're like, hey, just do it. And then the vendor will go out and just do all this stuff and then come back to the organization and say, here you go. Here's your nice box. Open it up and see what you have. Well, we took a different perspective. We wanted to have a partnership with them. And so we formed a steering committee. We outlined our list of activities, and we actually defined deliverables and actions. And then as we went through, we did some assessments. So we reviewed their current process that they were actually utilizing with the old application. We identified some gaps, provided recommendations, and then we actually did a journey mapping for the change request so that we can actually define the different types of change requests and who needs to be notified. And then we talked about JSM configurations. So we went through and, we identified the different types of requests. We also helped them define the customers, their users, their project roles, all the permissions. Set up those agent workspaces and queues specifically for their different tier levels. And then the SLAs. We incorporated a lot of automation. So we really use the automation functionality that's within Jira. And then we integrated with the Jira software projects. Then we focused on the customer portal. And so that's where we worked on, breaking those requests into different request types. We identified different message configuration. We had different groups. And meaning different groups is that they had different departments and different groups throughout the United States. And then we ensured that our permissions were set up properly. Now, the knowledge base was something very new for this organization. So we helped set up the Confluence page, gave them some guidelines on how to create the spaces, and then created some templates so that the service agents and also the engineers can have a standard format and a standard look and feel to share with the customers. And then for the training piece of it, we actually develop our communication strategy because this is going to be a change. And so we had to work with communicating to the organization as a whole, to the users, which we're calling customers, and to those service agents that are at the service desk. So we did a lot of user acceptance testing, developed a user manual, and did training on, the agent level, the customer level, and also how to administrate the JSM tools. So if they have changes to their SLAs or want to add different SLAs or create additional queues. So I always say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so I'm a big visual person, and I call it, my eye candy. And so we created a Jira project specifically for the JSM migration. And we captured all the steps we needed to do for the migration and the configuration. So we made our work very visible. So this included all the tasks that was assigned to the client also, like documentation, compiling use cases. And then we actually linked these tasks up to epics for better reporting. So we had such epics like for the standard JSM configuration, some around the workflow modification, the portal design, and Confluence, so that we can actually track the progress on those certain areas that we're focusing on. And then we had daily stand-ups with the steering committee. And so that really helped us keep aligned on the client's actions and on our actions. And so we would identify any blockers or roadblocks that we ran into. And then we also had weekly reviews where we could capture that instant feedback for any modifications or enhancements. That really helped us move forward and actually have that iterative process. So we was getting constant feedback and making tweaks to the workflow, making tweaks to the portal. So some of the things that we did, you're kind of like, okay, got all that, set the stage. What exactly did you do? So I'm going to walk through some of those challenges that I talked about and what we did to overcome those. So when I was talking about the portal usage and that generic request types with many attributes, we actually had the portal request type groups. So we identified those request types and have specific ones. Because in the past, they would just send that email or they make a phone call. So with that customized portal, we were able to decrease the complexity and limit those fields that's really needed for that specific request type. So this provided a better user experience. And then automation rules. So once again, the request escalations for IT service levels was not there. And so the team really wasn't familiar with that ITIL practice. And so we utilized the ITIL workflows. And then within the workflow, we had automation of creating a task for a tier level. So when it would go to escalate and say that is at the escalation level for a certain type of request, it needs to go to our security operations Jira project. And so within the automation, we were able to create a ticket for them in that project so it would show up in their backlog and plan. And then we linked it back to our main service desk. And so when they were updating that issue, it would reflect back to the service desk. So we did a lot of automation on updating the status of both the incidents and the request. Then we looked at service level agreements. And so to address those long triage and having those emails staying open, we started defining some SLAs. And so for this particular organization, they had an in-house service desk support, and then they had one that was after-hour support. And so they really didn't have an idea of what was the SLA for the people in after hours. And so we defined different metrics and set up that different timing so that we can track that better. And then my favorite part of all of this was hooking up to Azure AD. So remember when I said when they got that email, they were struggling trying to find who's the requester's contact information, who's their manager, and then who approved this. I've got, 100 emails. I've got to sift through and see, did this get approved? So to address that manual process, we actually implemented the add-on for Azure AD. So we had Azure Active Directory. And so with that, when the requester would enter a request, we would have it automatically populate these attributes into that request. And so we captured the employee ID, their job title, their department, their phone number, who their manager was. And then by having that information, we automatically set the approver as the manager. And now when this would come through, they would submit that request. That manager would receive an email, and then they can approve that request within their email. So they didn't have to go out to the portal or have that email change back and forth to the service desk agent. And then to address the times when the manager is out on vacation. And so when they know the manager is out on vacation, we implemented a feature that's around reassign the approver so that they can reassign it to the person that's covering for that manager so it doesn't get stuck. And then for managing the license and vendor cost, the service queues really helped out a lot, because then there's not an extra cost to build out a different service queue or to create a filter or JQuil. And so that really reduced the cost for the organization, and it provided a lot of flexibility. And then since we automatically created those tier 3 into the Jira project, we didn't have to have a lot of agent license. Then around change management, we did a lot of changes or modifications there and made it a lot smoother. We had the change calendar automatically populate with the change request information, and which is really nice tool within JSM, because you have a lot of flexibility of dragging and dropping that within that calendar's UI. And then once again, we utilize the automation rules so that when a change request was entered, we predefined a certain set of groups. So we had approver groups that were identified for each type of change request. And then we had another group that was really just for notifications. They didn't need to approve it, but they wanted to be aware of that. If it was implemented or if it was completed or if it failed. And then with the on-call calendar, I really like this feature within JSM too. It really eliminates trying to manually manage all these multiple Outlook calendars. And so we had a central place where we could look and see, okay, who is on call? Now, to kind of wrap this up, all the lessons that we've learned is Jira configurations. One of the things I recommend is clean up the Jira configurations. So for an example, in this particular one, there were so many different permission schemas, custom fields that had the same name. There were multiple priorities. So they had like the priority field, they had like low, and then they had like low business value. We identified that and suggested to fix that. But since we knew this wasn't going to be fixed before the rollout, we utilized the urgency field and then hid the priority field from the service desk. So as I was configuring JSM, I also logged some best practice issues, and we created a backlog on the Kanban board to implement this after we did the rollout. So for an example, around permissions, usage of roles, multiple priorities, various issue types, and different field renderers. And then we also had full participation in the workflow reviews, okay? This is very important, especially if you're redefining the current process and you need to make adjustments, as this team was just starting to embrace ITIL. So they weren't really familiar with, okay, tier one, when does it go to triage? When does it go to tier two? So we really had everyone participate in the workflow reviews so that there was a better understanding and also more concise or more collaboration around the agreement of the workflow. We also did user journey mapping. So we really didn't do this for the incidents and the request types. We mainly did this through change request because they had a lot of different changes across different environments, different technology. So we really wanted to understand that change request. We also did use case scenarios earlier, okay? So when we first came in, the agents just wanted to replicate their current system, but we needed to point out various areas for improvements because there were challenges with the old system. So we actually had working sessions to say, let's define the use case scenarios so we can look for those areas for improvement. And then we actually did UAT earlier in the process, okay? But there were many changes of status naming. So like they had 3 levels of UAT for different groups. So they had a hard time like looking at, okay, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, what does that mean? Because they used it before, was like, this is internal group XYZ. And so we wanted to have UAT earlier in the process so that they can really understand the workflows. And then the one key we had was really have those agents participate so that they can really become advocates for the process change and really understand the flow and the automation earlier in the process. So this would also help with the teams to understand how JSM and the Jira projects are integrated. And so we built out those user guidelines as we were configuring our JSM. And so this helped out with the UAT and the expectations of the new system. Okay, so we wrapped up lessons learned. We can go to Q&A. So I've seen there are a lot of questions posted up. So see, anybody have any questions? Any quick questions? I see one from Tanya. What method did you use to know when the manager was away and there needed to be an alternate? So actually, that was pretty much captured at the service desk agent. And so they had a Outlook calendar and they would set that up beforehand. So when a manager was out, the service desk already knew that information. And so they would do the reassign the approver with that. What calendar did you sync change management approvals with? So that is actually a feature within JSM. So there is a calendar that has your change requests within there. So if you go to JSM, you can have the change requests show up on that calendar. Next question, Isaac, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. How did you add the redesign button or the workflow? Okay, so what we did with that is actually I customized the workflow and put a little bit of logic in the workflow to click that reassign. So I believe when I did this, JSM didn't have that functionality, but since then they have allowed that. So you can assign it, like there is an approver group that you can do that reassign. If you want to reach out to me and you have my email, I can email you the exact, give you snippets of the code and how I did that. So Tanya, a follow-up on managing the calendar with when they're out of office. No, we did not have that automated yet. I mean, that is something that is the goal, and we would look at different ways to do that. But right now, to be honest, I haven't really looked at providing a solution for them because that really wasn't a high priority on the backlog. Approximately how many users in Brittany, approximately how many users and projects did the organization have during the deployment? So what they did is kind of give you a brief background is that their Jira projects were set up as Jira teams. So they had about 12 different Jira projects that span different areas. The number of users, oh my gosh, it was, I'm trying to think exactly. I'm throwing, it's a pretty big number. It wasn't, 1,000. It was probably more closer to 10,000. They have a lot of different smaller business units throughout the country. And so what we did in JSM, just to kind of give you some background, we didn't manually add them in as customers. We utilized the Active Directory. And so when anybody within the client in the organization, we would add them to organization users. And so within JSM, we configured that group to be our customers. Kevin, we are thinking of moving to JSM. Is there a provision where external customers can log into JSM? Yes. So that's where you would define your customers in JSM. They only have access to the portal. So from the portal view, they can submit requests, they can see tickets that were logged, that they logged, or you can also configure it if you want them to see other requests or tickets that were similar topics that were logged by anybody. And within this organization, what we're also doing is, because within Atlassian, the JSM tool, you can have various service desk portals. And so we're actually in process of setting up one for the marketing area. And so they will have their own portal, their own types of requests around marketing and questions that they're getting asked from the external users from the website. So it will be linked up to their website, their external website. And so we'll have that, but it won't be part of this service desk. So that's one thing I like about this tool and Atlassian product is that you can have more than one service desk, even internally. You can have one that's open to, which we're doing with JSM, or you can have another specific one that's maybe you want to limit a lot of the permissions and you want to have your HR totally separate. And that's all about onboarding, vendor contracts, things like that. Any other questions? Oh, so what is the email? My email is, if you can see the screen, it's Kathi.Paquet at centricconsulting.com. All right. Well, how much time do I have left? Are we at the end?
I believe it's 15 minutes, Kathi. It goes till
Oh, I have to.
Or
oh, I have to 15 more minutes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought I only had 30 minutes. So, all right. Any other questions for me? Anything you'd like to hear more about? If not, you can actually take the time and go hang out in the JiraCon hall and kind of look at the different booths and what's coming up next. You can see that on the slide deck. So, will you need to include the Kevin? Will you need to include the customer under our license model? No, you do not. The license is only being used to access the service desk queues within Jira. Customers use that portal. And I was going to go back and show the portal piece of it if I get there. Probably skim through it. I thought I had a picture of the portal. So your license is really able to see the queues, develop the queues, do the SLAs. And so this is the portal. So customers will see this view. And then when they click on it, you have customized this request type. And so you can you have the flexibility of only showing certain fields that's pertaining to that request. So, when you're requesting new software and hardware versus requesting system access, I have different attributes or fields displayed on those. And also, the one thing that I like is that we have the knowledge base. And so when they start to type something in, it will give them some suggestions. So like one of them could be, I have a pin pad issue. And so it would pre-populate with some articles, or my printer's not working. And then it will populate with the article, a troubleshooting the printer. So can JSM portal connect to an AI chatbots, or is Confluence the only knowledge base integrated? From Eric. Sorry, I forgot to say your name first. One thing with that one is, to be honest with you, I really do not know. I've never looked at having it connected to chatbots. There is so much out there, and you can do searches and reach out to the Atlassian community, and they may have some examples and give you some recommendations on some of the add-ons that they have. I know every day there's new add-ons being built. You're welcome. Other things that, like I mentioned, just to kind of recap, the key things that I really liked with the JSM is that the automation rules helped save a lot of manual steps. The connection to Azure really gave a lot of insights and helped the service desk agents on the approval process. And the SLAs and the ITIL as being the framework, that's really helped them also comply to their compliance and to the regulations that they have within their organization. So it wasn't something, you know, that they had to create a whole different document for. They could easily link some of their processes to the ITIL controls. Any other questions? Oh, you got to have some questions for me. Well, you are welcome. I hope that you can at least walk away with a couple of nuggets, or even just some ideas on what you can do if you're trying to implement JSM or anything within the Jira configurations. Okay, great question. Is this Ariel? Is when you create the issue in another Jira project outside of JSM, how do you ensure that the information provided in the form is also available in the project ticket? Okay, great question. So what I did is at the Jira project level, I actually created a issue type that was service desk follow-up. And so with that, I created an automation rule. So whenever the service desk ticket that was entered in JSM would be escalated. So when it gets to escalated, I had an automation rule that would automatically create that ticket in the proper Jira project and populate those fields. So as I mentioned, where the priority wasn't going to be cleaned up and we were using urgency, I had to do some mapping to urgency to the priority. So there was like a couple of if statements. And then also what I did when it got created within the automation rule, I had them linked together. And so at the Jira project level, I am an engineer and I closed that ticket in my Jira project. I had an automation rule that sets in JSM, and it was scheduled just like a trigger. And so whenever they closed that Jira project ticket, it would automatically update into the service desk ticket and move that to a status of final review. So that's how we kept them sync in the information going. And, the reason we did that is mainly because of the licensing cost. Now, the organization has more funding and they are able to take on that cost of having more service agents. And so what they're doing now is in each of the Jira project areas, so like in service operation or security operations, infrastructure, they identified a key tech lead that actually would have a service desk agent license. They're experimenting with that. They've ran into a couple of things, like when that lead is on vacation, then who's the person that can have access. So they're trying that out to see how that really works within their context. Anything else? Sure. Can you please show again the screen where the reassign button was displayed? Let me see. That was Azure AD. So actually I created this reassign approver. And so to give you some information around that, they were running into some challenges that the service desk agent kept reassigning. And so the service desk manager said, okay, I want to track who is clicking this button and why they're clicking it. And so we captured some things through the automation rule and through adding a custom hidden field to capture the comments and the person that actually clicked that button, because they didn't know if it was a training issue or if someone was just like, the managers were, or people were just saying, just reassign it to someone else. So we wanted to ensure that we actually had the manager's approval and who was that, if they were getting carried away with just using that button. And one thing that one other special thing I did was out of the box, the approver was like approver group. And I wanted to be able not to have a group, just have one manager approve. This is specifically for request. So we actually had a custom field created for approver for this specific request type. Right now, JSM has made modifications, so you don't have to do that now. But at the time when we were implementing this late last year, that functionality wasn't there. And so on the change request, we require a group of individuals to approve that change. And so that's where you'll see the canned field that comes out of JSM that says approvers. And so just to call out, approver, we modified this just to have one approver. But you don't have to. I mean, you could just still use approvers. So that way you don't have to use the reassign. It's really just depends on, what is that business problem you're trying to solve. All right. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay. Well, okay. Another question from Ariel. Who was responsible in reassigning the approver and who had the permission to do it? The only person that could do that was the service desk agents. And so this is a pretty small group. There was a group of 5. And so that's where they were coming in, and they came back and asked that, hey, can we track who is doing this reassign approver? Because then they wanted to see, is there one service desk agent that is overutilizing that? But I mean, what you can do, you can set up a permission on that. So within the workflow in JSM, for that to be, for someone to click on that, you can set up the pre-condition validation that that approver is a certain group. I normally don't use usernames because if the person leaves the company, so I'd usually set up a like reassign approver group and maybe have one or two people, pretty much two, so that you always have a backup that are allowed to hit that button or reassign it. Okay, well, I have 2 minutes left. No, I'm at time now. Once again, I want to thank everyone for joining this session. A lot of great questions. Hope you can walk away with a couple of nuggets and enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye.